Hi, EDL DST 315. This is an introduction to week 6, Disability in Colonial America. And everything for this week, which is discussion forum post number 3, is due on Thursday, September 24th at 11:59 p.m. There's a terrific discussion on the discussion posts about Indigenous America this past week. I really love it. I also pushed you all to think more specifically about what Teresa McCarty raises about language and disability. How is referring to a language as dead or broken a way of discounting a culture? How is having a normative or acceptable way of speaking similar to having normative acceptable way of being? And the Judy Heumann reviews were terrific. It's just an amazing book. Everybody's reading it and really liking it. I have a few general comments here about the reviews. For one thing, writing a book review is a great skill to develop. Read a book and write a 4 to 5 page review of it. People love it, and it's helpful to encapsulate a book in a few pages. It helps me when I think about my reading. You all wrote really lovely reviews covering the main points of the narrative and exploring your own major findings. Some of you made really wonderful connections about Judy's struggles and your own lives, and you made some really powerful reflections on change and activism, which I think is the major takeaway of Judy's life and work. How she pulls together people to activate for change, to take a stand. Many of you also emphasized Judy's ability to make disability visible, noting that invisibility and ignorance about disability is one of the major social burdens facing people with disabilities. As Judy wrote on page 143, when someone ignores you, it's an intentional display of power. They are essentially acting like you don't exist, and they do it because they can. Ignoring silences people. So in this way, Judy Heumann really works like a public educator in educating the world about disability. Many of you were also inspired by Judy's work, as am I, but I will introduce here a short warning about the concept of inspiration in disability using a term called inspirational porn. Inspirational porn is a term used by people with in the disability community. It's the portrayal of people with disabilities as inspirational solely or in part on the basis of their disability. Criticisms of inspiration porn include that it others disabled people, that it portrays disability as a burden as opposed to focusing on the societal obstacles that disabled people face, and that reducing disabled people to inspirations dehumanizes them and makes them exceptionalist examples or one-dimensional saints who only exist to warm the hearts and open the minds of able-bodied people. The argument here is that when we call a disabled person inspirational, we are furthering their exceptionality and otherness and thereby dehumanizing them. So it's just something to think about when we're thinking about disability. Okay, week 6, Disability in Colonial America. Learning objectives for this week. Learn about how disability was conceived of and experienced in early colonial America, and learn about the early American artist and performer Martha Ann Honeywell. So you're going to read chapter 2 and 3 of Kim Nielsen's book, Disability History of the United States. Read the article about Martha Honeywell and also the podcast where we interview the author, and then a short podcast from BBC Channel 4 on freaks and entrepreneurs. By colonial America, I mean the European settlement of North America, and Kim Nielsen's book divides this period into two. Chapter 2, Colonial Communities, 1492 to 1700, the poor, vicious, and infirm, and Chapter 3, the late colonial era, 1700 to 1776, the miserable wretches were then thrown into the sea. This is the period you might remember from your high school history class as the period from Christopher Columbus through the Pilgrims and leading up through the first early European settlements of North America up to the American Revolution. An important historical context to think about here is that both periods mark the creation of a new culture and a new nation. How is a new nation and a new community created? How does that process include the creation of norms and acceptable behavior? You might think at a local level about your own life. How has your own social group created norms of behaviors? What is acceptable and what is not in order to be part of your group? Our general big picture question this week is, How is the identity of disability and differently abled people considered in this period? What contextual changes impacted the lives of people with disabilities, for example, slavery, and also the development of a more structured economic and political system? One way to get at this question is through the study of who is not included in the concept of norms and acceptable behavior. And this is where the concept of freaks and freak shows gets right to this idea in an interesting way. First, we know that people with different body types were commonly, historically, called freaks and have historically been seen as outsiders worthy of intrigue and fascination. The second aspect of the history of freaks is understanding how people with different body types took advantage of that public fascination for their own financial gain. So the historical question raised in some of our readings and podcasts this week is whether these people with disabilities were being taken advantage of, or were they taking charge of their own lives? Were they being exploited, or were they entrepreneurs? Were they being stared at, or were they the people who were staring? So Martha Ann Honeywell is a really great example of this tension. Read that great article about Honeywell and listen to the podcast interview with Honeywell's biographer, Laurel Dane. One interesting point in this podcast in the podcast in particular, is how Dane describes the way that she as a scholar found disability history. And her main point is how Martha Honeywell, lived her life as a woman with a disability as an entrepreneurial artist. Dane's point is that Honeywell is an example of dual strategies of the spectacular and the conventional. And so Dane's argument about the dual strategies are this. First, that Martha Honeywell, her uniqueness, her atypical body, her position as an independent and skilled woman artist made her unique. But second is her focus on the way that Honeywell used gender and gender-appropriate art, her own feminine self, her traditional feminine arts, she made miniatures and needlework, to assure her customers of traditional femininity, to not scare people away. In this way, Honeywell both stimulated her customers' curiosity about her unusual body and simultaneously assuaged their anxieties and alleviated their fears about her abnormality. Then there's a short BBC broadcast that covers the same topic in the British context about freaks and entrepreneurial aspects. And I ask a discussion question kind of along these lines. Also, coming up, due on October 1st, is a mid-semester short statement on your chosen research project for this class. This is a 2 to 3 page paper with at least 3 references on the topic of your proposed research project. I have some stylistic guidelines in the assignment, e.g., for example, you introduce the topic in this paper, you introduce the topic for your final research project by presenting an argument to a friend or a teacher or a relative about why it's important to know about this research that you want to take on. The purpose of this first assignment, this mid-semester assignment, is to get you started on the initial research on your topic before the semester gets away with us. Some of you have written me individually to discuss your topic ideas. Please feel free to do that. I can also meet in Google Hangouts and talk about any possible ideas you might have. I hope your semester is going well. It's a tough time for many of us, and it may be getting tougher or not, I don't know. But be sure to take care of yourselves. If you're facing any particular challenges or deadlines, please let me know. Do you need an extension? Do you want some flexibility? You want to talk things out? Please let me know. I'm available, particularly on email. Hope you're well.